Hello everyone, and welcome to our fall flamingo watercolor tutorial. So with this flamingo, I just sketched her out. I do not have a reference photo, but I will have the sketch drawn out for you guys to print out if you would like to trace onto your watercolor paper. So I just did her little body here with a pumpkin, pumpkin body, and then her legs. I'm doing this on a piece of 8 by 10 Arches 140-pound cold press paper. I'm doing mine on a watercolor block, so I don't have to tape it down. And basically, a watercolor block is when it's sealed on all sides, and then there's a little bit of an opening right here that when I'm finished, I can put a little butter knife or something in there and peel the paper off. So that keeps me from having to tape it down to any kind of board, which I like. So I'm going to be using for start my number 8 round brush. I have my water, my rags, and the colors I'm going to be using, excuse my messy palette, I'm going to be using yellow ochre, vermillion. I have some scarlet lake here. I have some alizarin crimson. I have some rose madder, which is like a pinky color. I have some indigo blue, and I have some sap green, and I have some Paynes gray, and then I also have here, my mind is blank, burnt sienna. So I might not use all of these colors, but they are on my palette in case I want to use them. So, and then what I'm going to do is, once I've, put my pumpkin in, I might add some little free-handed flowers here and some leaves. So I'm kind of still undecided on that, but I think that's what I might do here. Just suggesting some kind of little flower, no drawing or anything needed. I'm just going to kind of paint in little flowery shapes and little leaves, I think. So what I like to do first is wet. I'm going to be wetting my pumpkin just with clean water. And I like to do that so when I first put down my pigment, I will get nice soft blendy edges. I won't get really hard edges to start. So I just kind of want to really wet it nice and even with my round brush. I'm just wetting the pumpkin part. And I'm not going to be doing traditional flamingo pinky, all the pinky colors. So she's a fall version. I'm going to have some oranges and some browns in there. A little bit of pinks here and there. We'll see. So I just have my pumpkin now nice and wet, nice even layer of wetness. You don't want it, you definitely just want to use more than one brush load of water. You don't want to just use one brush load of water through the whole thing. It won't be enough and you'll have some dry areas. So I'm just going to start by adding a little bit of my vermilion orangey color, and I just get that moving on my palette a bit. Now, if you don't have these exact colors, it's fine. You can use whatever kind of warm yellows you have and any kind of oranges, just a basic red, a pink, if you have it. You could use ultramarine blue instead of indigo. You could use hooker's green instead of sap green. And I might not even use the Paynes gray or the burnt sienna. Not sure what I'm going to be doing, but I just have them on here just in case. So I'm just getting a little bit of my orange right now. And what I like to do, if I feel like I have too much on my brush, I just kind of tap the excess off on my towel. And then what I'm going to do is just go in. And you can see I'm just kind of placing a little bit of orange. I mean, I have so much pigment on my brush, I could go for days. But I'm just placing a little bit of pigment, just dotting it in. I'm going to rinse my brush and blot it really good. And then I'm going to use what's here on my paper just to spread around a little bit. So my paper's wet, my brush is wet, which means I'm going to be diluting this pigment that's here already a little bit. And I'm basically just going in and pushing that pigment around a little bit. Still leaving some white space. You know, I'm not filling it in completely, like I'm not painting it solid, because I want to add other colors as well. And you always with watercolors want to start with your lightest colors, work toward your darkest colors. So I just like to get a nice little underpainting in there first. And now I'll take a little bit, I think I'm going to take a little bit of my yellow ochre. Just get a little bit of that on my brush. Place that here and there. Just get a little variety of color in that pumpkin. Rinse my brush. And I'm just going to kind of spread it out a bit. And where my seams are on my pumpkins is where I will have most of the shadows in. But in the start, when you're first starting your paintings, you don't want to worry about details yet. You just want to get your base down. And then we'll go back later and redefine it a little bit more and add some more detail. I'm going to switch brushes now to a smaller brush. I'll use a number 6 round brush. I'll just go in and kind of, this one has a little bit of a firmer point to it. So I just want to go in and just clean this up a bit. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, since I have a little bit of an undercoating there on my pumpkin, I'm going to take just a damp brush, clean water, and the edge here, right where my pumpkin is, I don't want that to dry like a hard edge and then have color here. I want it to be blended. So I'm just going to take my damp brush and just go along the edge of that pumpkin and let some of that color just bleed a little bit onto her neck. So I don't just get a hard dry edge right there. Okay, let's go in with a little bit of my rose madder. Now again, if you don't have rose madder, permanent rose would be a great option for this as well. Any kind of magenta would be pretty. And all you need to do for this is, I just took a little bit and I'm adding water to the little bit I took. Remember, adding water to your pigments lightens them up. So I'm just going to go in kind of where my seams are and just kind of drop a little bit of my rose madder. Just here and there. I'm not making complete straight solid lines. I paint very intuitively. So I just kind of assess the painting and kind of get a feel for what it needs. So again, I'm not doing the details yet. I'm just building up my colors. And you might not want to put any yellow in your pumpkin. You might not want to put any pink. You know, it's totally up to you what colors you'd like to use. But the fun thing is you just basically, you just want to, the importance in watercolors is to have a values and contrast. And values are the lightness and darkness of your colors. So you don't want to have the whole thing be very light, and you don't want to have the whole thing be very, very dark. You need the light and darks in your paintings, all of your paintings, always. So that's what makes your paintings pop, is the value change and the contrast. Lights against darks, and the light and dark of the colors. So I'm just kind of blending out with a clean damp brush the part of this pumpkin and bringing some of that pinkish orangey color up her neck a bit. I'm going to take a little bit of my vermilion, just a little bit here on my brush, and this area of my painting is wet now because I, brought some of that damp brush and blended some of that color out. So I'm just going to add a little bit of that orangey vermilion to her neck here where she's wet. And I'm going to just rinse my brush and just take a damp brush now and move up her neck just with water. This is the wet on wet technique. Wet paint onto a wet surface, onto wet paper. So I'll go all the way down to her head here, avoiding her eye. Okay, let me get a little bit more of my vermilion orange, strengthen that up a little bit, and I come up along the right side of her neck here because that color will kind of bleed out a little bit because this is wet. So it'll kind of feather out, and then I can go in and help it with a clean damp brush and just kind of pull out that color. Now, every holiday I try to do some kind of flamingo. Adding a little more vermilion. My Christmas one is usually my most popular. And I haven't decided what to do. Usually I do some kind of flowers. So just clean damp brush now, and I'm just pushing that pigment up her neck, using what's here, and just pushing it around. So everything is very light still. My paper's still wet. I can see my different colors in there. So I'm going to continue working, and I think I'm going to take a little bit of my tiny bit of my yellow ochre here. Just get a little bit on my brush, tiny bit. And I'm going to come up here on the left side of her neck now, where my paper is still damp. And literally, you see where I'm holding my brush, so I have total control here. And I'm using the very tip just to dot in a little bit of that yellow, just so I can have a variety of colors in her all together. And she's just not one solid color. So I'm rinsing now, blotting, and just kind of pushing that pigment. Now I don't have much here on my brush or in the neck area right here. So I'm not going to see a whole lot going on here, but that's all right because I'm working my way. And sometimes I stop and I assess to see what's going on. And so just take your time. I'm going to take a little bit of my pink now, my rose madder. That's a pretty strong color. So down here where the pumpkin meets her neck, I'm gonna drop in a little bit of that darker pink right here. And my paper has started to dry here. As you can see, that pigment is not really moving anywhere. So I'm just going to pull it out a little bit, and I'm just focusing here on the bottom edge. Yeah, that's pretty pretty dry right there because that paint is just sitting. That's fine. So I'm gonna stop here, rinse, and I'm going to just soften what's here and kind of pull it out a little bit more. And this is how I get my darkers values in there. I do a little bit at a time. Some people, you know, might really build up their darks quickly. I tend to do mine much slower and more work them in. So I'm just taking a little bit more of my pink, rinsing and blotting, and then softening that edge. I like for things to look seamless. Some parts of my paintings to look seamless. So I think I'm going to also take a little bit of that pink and now add it to my pumpkin here where my seams are. I'm going to kind of go in just so there's a little harmony here with my pink and my oranges. And this part has dried as well, almost dry. So I'm just kind of bringing it up the seam there a little bit, rinsing and blotting. I'm like a broken record that way. And then I just soften this up. I paint a lot, sometimes with more water than I do anything else. A little bit more of my pink. Now here I have her legs kind of coming down here into a little bit of a V shape. So just kind of gather that. Just establish where that's going to go. Again, a tiny, tiny bit of my pink, really on the tip of my brush. I'm using a very controlled here. I'm being very controlled, and just adding a little bit more of my pink. Now it's important to leave lighter areas. I'm going to pull some of this out like that, pressing down with my brush. It allows me to use a little bit more of the belly of the brush. Rinsing and blotting and blending it out. So she's looking very soft right now. I'm going to take a little bit more of my pink. And now I'm going to come over here. So I'm kind of just focusing on the bottom portion of her right now, just because to get those darker kind of shadows in where it naturally would be a little darker on the pumpkin. Rinsing and blotting and just softening those up. Now, if you feel like you're getting too much pigment or you're really getting too dark with your pumpkin, you can always take a clean brush, add a little water, and use your brush to try and lift out a little bit of paint, or just take a tissue and, you know, dampen the area you need lightened up, and then just blot it, and that usually helps. I'm just really taking my time here. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of orange now, my orange. And I think I'll kind of start a little bit at the top and come down here where I'm a little bit damp still. And add a little bit of my orange. So as you can see, I'm starting to really kind of build up my colors. And using a variety of them. And here I'm just going to kind of pull a little bit of that color down this section. Still using my vermilion. And I'll come over here, do the same thing. Just kind of blend it out. Okay, I'm going to let that area dry just a bit. I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to go up to her. This is all kind of dry right now, so I'm going to re-wet this portion. I do have my ceiling fan on, so that helps things to dry quicker. And I'm going to just drop in some of my vermilion. And then damp brush. All the way down. And then I'm going to take a little bit of my pink, rose madder. I'm going to drop it in right here where her neck and her head kind of meet. And that's really blending out. Rinse. Get the excess water off and just push that pigment. Very gently. I'm just being very, very light and soft with my hand and my brush. I'm not trying to do real huge broad brush strokes or anything like that. I'm just really working to build up my colors. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit more pink. And I know this is dry, so you know what? I want to re-wet that. So I'm just going to re-wet this area here. And I'm going to add a little bit, little tiny bit more of my pink. And then rinse, blot, and push that pigment. Okay, now for her stem, I think I'm going to start with a little bit of my burnt sienna, which is my brownish, reddish brownish color here. And I'm going to just loosen that up a bit, my water. Don't want it to be very dark, so I'm adding some more water. Just want a nice kind of, runny burnt sienna. If you don't have burnt sienna, you could use burnt umber. You could mix up your red and a green and get a nice pretty red brown. So I'm going to start here where my little stem is, and I'm doing this on dry. I'm just establishing a little bit of the area where the stem is sitting in the pumpkin. And I'm just kind of going up on the right side of my stem on dry paper here. And just paint it to the one side, and then I take my damp brush and pull the rest of it over to the left side. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit tiny, tiny bit of my indigo. Believe it or not. Tiny, tiny bit. That's even too dark. So let me lighten it up a bit. Just a tiny, tiny bit. And I'm going to drop it right in the base of that stem, because that's damp right now. So I'm going to drop it in there, and what it's going to do, it's going to create a nice little shadow. And then I'm going to bring it up here on the right side, just kind of dotting that stem. And then I'll damp brush, and I'll just softly, very gently, softly pull that out. So it just looks like a funky little stem. Might even add a little bit more of my burnt sienna. A little bit darker value here on my burnt sienna, so I'm just taking a little bit, getting a little bit darker, a little bit less water in that burnt sienna, creamier paint, and same thing. Come here at the base of my stem and just drop in a little bit right on that right side. Rinse. Blot really good. And just kind of fill in whatever you need to. Push it around. Okay. That's pretty dry. I'm going to go in now, wet on dry, because this is slightly damp. And here's how you can tell. If it feels cool when you touch it, it's still slightly damp. If it feels room temp, then it's dry. I'm going to go in now and add some more of my darks and really kind of define the pumpkin a little bit more. And I'm going to go in just with my vermilion right now, but creamier paint, not as quite watered down. And I think what I'm going to do is take a little bit of this creamier paint, and I think I'm going to take a little bit of my pink. It might be too much. Add it to that. You get a nice coral color, but that's nice. I know it looks kind of really reddish on my screen here, but it's a nice, pretty coral color. Always add a little bit more. You need one or more of the color. So I'm going to use that nice creamy coral color. I'm going to go in now on dry paper, not too much on my brush, and I'm going to go in and really bring in some of that color. And you can see how when I am applying this paint, it's not moving. It's because my paper is dry. But I really want to start building up my darker values here. So I'm going to go in and just rinse my brush, and I'm pressing down, kind of using the body of my brush. And the paper that I use has texture to it. So you can see where like my brush kind of skips over the texture of the paper. If my paint is not very wet and my brush is not very wet, that's called dry brushing, and which really, you can really get some nice effects from that. So I'm just kind of adding some of that darker pigment here, a little bit more on my brush. My brush is, fairly dry. My paint's kind of thick and creamy, so I'm not going to get a lot of movement here, and I'm just adding some of that darker paint just to really start to shape this pumpkin. Blend it out just a hair. If you wait too long, when you put your paint down, if you wait too long and it starts to dry, it's going to be harder to blend out. Take that same color here. I'm going to come down here. And this is where you get to kind of use your feelers. You know, you just kind of want to have those darks against the lights. Stop, rinse, and blend. And you see I have a nice, I'm leaving some lighter areas in my pumpkin. I'm not filling it in solid. Pulling some of that down. I'm going to work my way, I'll work my way this way so I don't leave my hand on my wet paint. Come in here, this is damp. And I'm going to kind of pull a little bit up the middle there, so I just don't have like this overly, I don't want just that line here and here. I want to kind of have it, you know, connected a little bit to the center portion. So let me pull this up just a little. And it does not have to be perfect at all. Pull a little bit down here. We're not looking for perfection here, ever. So just blend that out. I don't like that this is too, I'm going to try and lift that out a little bit. I think I got too much here. Yeah, so just dropped in a little bit of my pink, brought some over, dropped in some darker pink here, cleaned that up a little bit, and I'm just continuing with a little bit of my pink. So I like to have some nice darks against my lights, but I don't want to have these just complete stripes. So I think I want to kind of just add a little bit here. This is still a tiny bit damp where I lifted it out. And then I'll bring a little bit up here. So I'm just using my rose madder here. And pull a little bit of that down. Rinse and blot, and then go in and soften this out just a bit. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit vermilion here. And just blending it out. Okay, a little bit of my pink. In certain areas, I can see that it feathers out. In certain areas, it just sits, depending on if my paper's damp or not. Let me blend out this line. A little more of my yellow here, my yellow ochre. I feel like I need a little yellow. Just kind of putting a little bit of that in, and then I'm just coming back with my damp brush. Trying not to get too, I don't want to completely darken my whole pumpkin. So I'm going to take a little bit of my pink here and kind of go up here where it might be a little bit darker, where there's those back portions. And just add some color up there. And then I just go in and tap, tap, just to blot that out. And let's pull that down a bit. I'm going to kind of work over here. Same thing, just kind of a little bit darker pink. Pull a little bit out there, a little bit down here. Rinse and blot. And then she starts coming into shape. Just taking that yellow ochre, just kind of adding a little bit of that in there. And really soften it up. So you can see I'm not, I'm just, dotting in some color here and there. Let me pull this up a little bit so you can see a little closer. Dotting in some color, and just so it's not so solid. I definitely have lighter spots. I have some darker spots. Darker values, there's contrast there. That's what you need with your painting. So I'm going to add a little bit of my yellow. I think a little bit of yellow up in here. And a little bit over here. Yellow ochre. And then just rinse. I'm constantly rinsing my brush. Constantly. So I'm going to take a little bit of my vermilion now. Start to come down here on our neck. And just pull some of that around. A little bit of that vermilion again. This time a little bit creamier paint, and I'm getting a little bit darker, but then I'm pulling it out. Pulling it out. Going up. Dry paper. Pulling it out. Blending it out. Okay, same thing up here. Dry paper, just adding that a little bit of that vermilion. And I think I'm gonna, for that dries, I'm gonna add a little bit of my pink with that as well. Just drop in a little bit of darker value, maybe bring a little bit down here, a little bit on our neck area, a little bit. And then I will use my damp brush just to move that paint. So it might look a little bit lighter, like where the bottom portion here of her face hooks to her neck and then fades up as I get to the top of her head. You just really have to take your time. Lots of patience with watercolors. Not like acrylics where you can just put that paint down, you don't like it, cover it up with another color, or lighten it up with white or something like that. Totally different medium, and you have to have patience. For sure. Okay. Now this is where her beak comes in. This is where I'm going to be using my Paynes gray. So a little bit of my Paynes gray. A little bit creamier paint, not real watery. Now if you don't have Paynes gray, you can, if you have ultramarine blue, you can mix a little bit of that with a little bit of your indigo together. Get a nice dark color. Okay, so I am just, I just have her beak drawn here. And I did not draw a little bit of a line, but I kind of done so many that I kind of know where to go. So I'm just going to kind of just very tip of my brush to do that. And then I just kind of come down here like that. And just kind of fill this in. Okay, rinse my brush, and I'm going to leave that right there, let that dry a little bit, and I'm going to come back up with a little tiny bit of my pink. And I mean, I am barely getting anything on my brush here. Very, very little bit. Very tip of my brush. And I'm going to come down here, and it's kind of dry, and I can tell I don't have any water on my brush or my paper right now. It's kind of doing a little dry brush look. And that's fine because I'm going to use that dry brush look to just skate in a little bit of color here. Careful not to touch my Paynes gray. And then I'll rinse and just soften that part out a bit. And then just carefully, if you want to wait for that part to dry, then that's fine. And then I'm just softly kind of giving that a little bit of a pink right in there. Okay, tiny bit of Payne's gray on her eye. So literally I'm taking the point of my brush and getting a little bit of that Payne's gray. And I'm going to go in and just put a little dot. And then I will kind of, very point of my brush. If you want to use a really like a micron pen here, totally fine. Very fine point pen is fine. And I'm going to very carefully just kind of go around that eye. Believe it or not, I'm going to blend that out a little bit. Just tip on my brush. Very softly. I'm going to darken up a little bit darker pink here. And then I'm rinsing my brush, and then I'm just using my damp brush, pull some of that color around. Kind of lift this out. It's got a little too much in there. So I'm just pressing down my clean damp brush and removing a little bit of that color. There, that looks better. It got a little too solid. There's always ways to fix things. Okay, so for her legs, I'll just take my little bit of my pink. Nothing fancy here with her legs. Dry paper. I always do kind of really skinny little legs. A little bit of a bend there at the knee. Then come all the way down. I mean, you can make yours as, you know, a little bit thicker if you like. And then I have another one kind of coming out this way. And a little bend. A little bit more water on my brush. Get a little dry there. She's got some long legs. And I just kind of do a little bit of a suggesting her little feet there. Yeah, I might thicken those legs up just a little bit. So I think at this point I'm going to let her dry, and then I'm gonna come back and assess and then finish her up. So I want to darken up my stem a little bit and just tweak it a little bit more, but I'm going to let it dry right now. So I'll be right back. Okay, she is nice and dry now, and I'm going to darken up a little bit by the stem. I'm going to wet it first just a little bit. Still using my number 6 crayon. I'm going to add a little bit of my burnt sienna here. Little burnt sienna, and I'm going to mix it just a little indigo. And and a little burnt sienna. So it's kind of like a dark reddish, bluish, grayish color. A little bit, and while that's damp, just going to drop it a little bit in here at the base. A little bit up on the sides where it's a little damp. Rinse, and then just kind of push that pigment. Moving it around a little bit. A little bit more burnt sienna. So really just take my time here. Okay, my stem looks good. So I'm going to now just give some little bit more dark to some of this pumpkin here. And I think I just want to use a little bit, I'm going to use a little bit, I think, of my alizarin crimson. Just get a little bit on the tip of my brush. Pull that over here. So I want some nice darks. And I think I'm going to add a little bit of my, a little bit of my pink. So I get a nice, like, rich, deep pink color. Blot any excess off. And I'm going to go in and just, on dry paper, I'm going to just kind of add a few little darker bits. Here and there. Blot. Soften them up. Oh, too much water there. Pull some of that up. And then take that same color, excuse me, and then just kind of get some darker values. The base here a little bit. This is on dry paper. And a little bit over here. And just always blend it out. I'm always blending things out. Okay. I'm going to add a little bit of that pinky mixture right here to kind of separate those, give them a little bit more dimension there, these two, just a little bit. Drop some in while it's damp, and then make a little bit here. Always rinsing and smoothing out. Rinse and smooth. If you ever find that you have you're like, when you're blotting it, or softening those edges, if you're just pulling too much paint and it's not really blending out, fading out, then what you want to do then what you want to do is rinse your brush and take, a little bit of excess off. So you just not keep picking up paint and distributing it. You want to keep rinsing and then blot again. I'm going to take a little bit more of that pink mixture. Just darken up by her neck a little bit, and then I'm going to kind of come over here and darken up a little bit right here. And then, of course, pull that out. And I'm going to darken her eye. I'm just dipping my brush a tiny bit into that Payne's gray color because I just want to darken her up a little bit. Just the eye part there. Okay. I'm just deciding if her legs are too thin. I think they're a little too thin. So I'm going to take that pink mixture that I just made, and I'm just going to go over them and kind of press down with my brush with a little bit more pressure. It will then use a little bit more of the brush than just the point, just to kind of thicken them up a little bit. And just bring it down. And again. Got a little bit more. She's long and lean. Okay, what I really wanted to do was add some flowers. No particular drawing of flowers, just some sweet little leaves and some little fall colored flowers. At this point, if you want to stop and just leave her the way she is, that's fine too. You don't have to do this part because this is just, I'm going to kind of be just sort of freehanding my flowers, but I want to make them different colors. I don't want them to be the same color as her. So I'm going to make a little bit of a violet color like I have here already, a little bit. So I'm going to take my alizarin crimson, a little bit of my indigo, and just keep mixing them together until I get a nice rich color that I like. So that's pretty. So that was my alizarin crimson and my indigo. And it's not very watery. It's pretty creamy. So I'm just going to start right about here. And I'm just being very kind of loose and expressive with these flowers. I'm going to make little circle comma shapes, actually, tiny little ones, to make kind of like a rose shape. And then I'll bring out some stems with some small little buds and leaves and things. So this is just, this is just kind of free-handed here, and I'm kind of deciding as I go. But here I make these little comma shapes with pretty creamy paint, like the center of a rose would be. And I just continue with those little comma shapes, kind of going around. And then I rinse my brush, and I just use a damp brush to kind of soften some of those little edges. and let them blend out a little bit. And I'm just kind of, you know, keep using that damp brush to kind of pull that color so it's softer looking. And I'm going to do another one right here, kind of facing to the right, I think. So I'll make a little C shape, comma. And I just kind of work those little comma shapes so they're kind of facing to the right. And then I take my damp brush and do the same thing, and I just kind of make it soft and blurry-ish. And so, you know, they're not too thick looking or, you know, too dark. I'm going to put another one here. I like to do florals in odd numbers. So I'm going to have this one facing to the right a little bit. So I'll make a backwards little C-shaped comma and just kind of work my way around. They're just tiny little flowers. You can make them any, you know, if you want to make little daisy flowers, whatever type of little thing you want. If you want to do this part, certainly don't have to. Just softening it all up. I'm taking my little bit of my yellow ochre and I'm just going to make some like long kind of stem shape. Pull it out a little bit and just tiny bit of dots, you know, just some little dot shapes to kind of fill it in. I'll do another one. So I'm just being very kind of free here and random, and use your intuition here wherever you feel you need, you know, some stem shapes. I like to kind of just fill in this area on top of the pumpkin. And then once I kind of get things going, I'm going to use a little of my sap green here. Once I get things going, I will then go back and, you know, kind of darken them up a little bit. Because remember, the watercolors do dry lighter. So I'm going to use a little of my alizarin crimson just to dull that sap green down a bit. Make it more of a duller green. I just keep working those two colors together till I get a color I like. Maybe a little Paynes gray in there. And I just keep, you know, adding a little water. If it's getting too thick, I add a little water. Then I'm going to make some little stem shapes with this color. Using my small round brush, and now I'm just pressing, you know, I'm just pressing it down. So you do want some darker values and some lighter values in here. So here's where you can be as creative as you want. A little one coming down here. Darkening up my little flower shapes, adding a little bit more of that violet purple color. not trying to be too particular here or too detailed. And just kind of blending it out and adding a little bit more color to this one. And I kind of, because that one's facing to the right a little bit, I like to take the back, you know, to the left side of that particular one and fill it in a little bit more. And then this one, I will kind of focus on the right side of the rose so it faces left a little bit. Just adding a few more little stems. Sorry, my hand's in the way. Using that green, darker green color. I'm going to bring some tiny little buds over here, and they're just little kind of dotty shapes. I just want to use a little bit of that purple over on this side to add to those stems. I'm going to do one more. So I'm just kind of doing little circle shapes here. Just to suggest. I like to suggest in a lot of my paintings. I'm just going to bring a couple more stems just to kind of fill it all out. I'm going to kind of darken my pumpkin stem up a little bit. Just using a little bit of that Payne's gray and burnt sienna. Just tweaking it a bit. I think I'm going to take a little bit of my yellow ochre here and mix in a little bit of that burnt sienna. And just kind of really darken the base of my stem here and pull some little more stems and little marks, you know, little dots that are like kind of like leaf shapes. Just trying to fill this area in a little bit more. And just strengthening some of those colors. Bring one out here. And then I think I'm going to bring one down here. Okay. So I'm just doing like little dots basically, just to kind of suggest those little flowers and buds. Now at the bottom here, I'm going to be adding the same colors that I used in the flowers, like, you know, some leaves and flowers have maybe fallen. And I'm just taking a little bit of that yellow ochre and making some little stem shapes again. And then I'm just kind of, we'll take a little bit of color and I just very lightly, not being very heavy-handed here, using those paints that I used in the flowers, and I'm just kind of dotting them down and creating little marks. Just that's all I'm doing is mark making here. I'm just making little marks to suggest leaves and stems and whatnot. So she's anchored down instead of floating. It kind of anchors her. So I just add a little bit darker color here and there. Whatever I've used above, I'll kind of just pull some color and add it to the bottom. And I'm being, I'm using not very wet paint, but not very dry as well. I want it to just be blendy and soft and not real thick. Definitely, water is the key here with watercolors. So I'm just using a little water to kind of soften that bottom edge. And I'll add a little bit of the orangey color now. Water is definitely the key with watercolors. You don't want to use thick. I find that with my students a lot of times they don't use enough water in their paint and on the paper as well. They're afraid to add water to it for fear of losing control. So I'm just kind of making everything soft and just dotting in some color. That's all I'm doing here. Now I'm just kind of looking her over. I'm going to, I think I'm going to darken up a little bit of those flowers with my indigo, just a tiny, tiny bit, just to darken the centers a little bit. Help make them pop a little bit more. And then I'll just kind of soften them out a little bit with a little bit of a clean, damp brush. And just targeting those little buds as well. Now, I didn't really kind of like how that was looking, so I just blotted it a little bit, soften it back. Okay, I think I'm just kind of looking her over, seeing if I need to do anything else. And I'm going to add a little bit more of my green, add some water because it keeps drying out on me. I'm going to add a little bit just brighter sap green. Now my problem is sometimes I don't know when to stop. And I end up overworking, but I just felt like it needed a little bit brighter green. Here and there. Maybe add a little bit down here. Just dotting it in. So I think I'm done here. I really like this, and I like how it, I have it down at the bottom as well, so it anchors her down. So that's it, guys. So thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed this.